Hey, welcome back to another 12 Months to Mastery module. This time we're going to be introducing one of the most important elements of game and pickup, which is frame control. And in this video, my goal is to introduce you to frame control, explain a couple different types of it, and teach you how to look for it and how to develop a feeling for who's controlling the frame, what the frame of the interaction is at any given moment, and to start just becoming aware that there are these frames and that they do determine a lot of our social interactions. So let's jump right into it. First off, what are frames? Frames are the underlying meanings of the interaction. They're what's going on under the surface. They're what this actually means. When a girl puts her hand on my waist and says, "You're cute," the underlying meaning of that interaction is that she likes me. When a girl says, "Buy me a drink," the underlying meaning of that interaction is, "You have less value than me. Provide something to make up the value." So I like to think about it as the frame focuses you on what you need to be looking at. That's really what the frame kind of does. It draws attention to the most important part of the interaction. Whatever you want to have the focus of the interaction be, which usually is that she's attracted to me and that we're going to sleep together. That's what we want to focus everything towards, and that's what we want to keep everything from going away from. So we want to do everything we can to focus it. The other thing that frames do are they set the context, and the context is a fancy way of saying the situational relevance. Your frames determine what's situationally relevant. If I'm talking to a girl that I'm interviewing for a job, the frames are set in a way that I have a lot of power and that she doesn't. However, if I'm talking to a girl that I just approached on the street, the frames are set, the context is set that she has more power than I do. So, however you focus your interactions, you're always setting context, the situational relevance. And that's a big thing because situational relevance is the number one rule of pickup. Everything we do has to be relevant in the situation. So the frame determines what's relevant in the situation. If I stop a girl and go, "Hey, I know this is really random, but I had to come meet you," the frame is I had to meet her and I'm attracted to her. If I stop her and go, "Hey, I need an opinion opener," the frame is this guy's kind of weird. Why is he stopping people to ask for an opinion? So be aware that frames are the underlying meanings. They focus what attention goes to, and they also determine what's situationally relevant in the current context. All right, so what is frame control? Frame control refers to the process of setting the dominant frame in the interaction. When two people are interacting, the stronger frame absorbs the weaker frame. So when two people are interacting, there can only be one underlying meaning to the interaction. And whoever sets that has more power, and they're controlling the frame. So that's what people are talking about when people say, "I frame control it away," or, use frame control to get attraction. What you're talking about is you're setting the dominant frame in the interaction. So if I come in and my dominant frame is I'm cooler than the girls, and I can get the girls to accept that I'm cooler than them by teasing or, by telling all these cool stories, by making them laugh, by having high social value, social proof, stuff like that, I can set the frame that I'm cooler than them. However, if I come in and I try to set this frame that I'm cooler than the girls and they reject it, they break it, then we have kind of a stalemate, a frame battle, as they were called in the old days of fast seduction. In reality, it just means you're both sizing each other up. It's like in kickboxing, which is my go-to analogy now that I kickbox every day. In kickboxing, you're sizing up. You don't want to go on what you're doing. You want to go on what your opponent's doing. It's the same thing with frame control. You want to, like Aikido, and use your opponent's motion against them. So if the girl's trying to set a frame that I'm less cool than her, I might go with it for a second and then flip it around, right? If a girl's like, "Buy me a drink," I might go with it for a second and then flip the frame on her by doing something like, "Well, I'll buy you one when you buy me one." So in general, there's two types of frame control. And the two kinds of frame control are active frame control. This is basically everything you think of when you're thinking about frame control. This is things like cutting threads, talking over people, being non-reactive, passing congruence tests, all that stuff. Then you have passive frame control, and this is happening all the time. You can always passively control the frame. And that refers to things like teasing, assuming the sale, misinterpretation, all of these things that passively control the frame without making it look like you're spending all sorts of energy. There's good and bad to both. Active frame control is really dominant. The good thing about active frame control is that it sets a good amount of dominance. You're being dominant, you're being masculine, you're taking charge, you're being the man. On the other hand, it's also can be a little controlling, can be a little over the top, can be a little rude. So we want to mix active and passive. Passive frame control, on the other hand, nobody even notices it doing, so sometimes it doesn't work because it's so subtle. Sometimes it doesn't work, except on the subconscious level. So we want to mix them up. There's a time to use active, a time to use passive, and what I want to do now is kind of go into each one of these, active and passive, in a little more detail so you get what I'm talking about. Active frame control happens when you need to actively take control of the frame. Most of the time, for the first 5 minutes of any interaction, you're going to need to engage in active frame control. You're going to need to be more dominant, louder, more in control of the conversation, more non-reactive, all of this stuff, because you need to come in and really take over the interaction and show that you're really cool and high value and yada, yada, yada. So generally, active frame control happens more in the beginning and passive frame control happens more later on. You can kind of chill out a little bit once you have some attraction. So the most common forms of active frame control are transitioning, which we've talked about. Transitioning is a form of frame control because part of frame control is controlling the conversation, leading the conversation. That's a big, big part of frame control, as you can see down at the bottom of this page right here. Controlling the conversation is a lot of frame control. It's a big, big part of it. Ignoring things that can't help you, sticking to your good subjects, bridging from subject to subject in a smooth manner, transitioning. All of that stuff is active frame control. You can also throw in things like cutting people off. If someone in the group is talking a lot and you need to take control of the group, you sometimes need to cut them off. Things like being non-reactive. Girls start giving you shit, or a guy comes in, you just ignore it. That's active frame control, because by actively ignoring it, you're putting the focus of the interaction on what you want it to be on. If a guy comes in and starts trying to talk to me and talk to the girls and I ignore him and I keep talking to the girl like he's not even there, I've controlled the frame. I've set the frame in this interaction that this guy doesn't matter, and if the girls ignore him too, the frame is set. So active frame control definitely has its place. You want to kind of learn to actively control frames without thinking about it, but in the beginning you're going to have to think about it a little bit. You may even become a little bit of a frame control junkie. You don't want to frame control your friends. You don't want to frame control your parents or try to frame control your boss or anything like that. But you do want to make sure that you're aware of when frame control is happening in all situations. You don't necessarily need to react to it, because sometimes playing these frame battles is very antagonistic. Sometimes you have to do it to get laid, but you don't want to do it with your friends and family and stuff. But just be aware when people are making frame control attempts, when your friends are trying to get you to do things, when your boss is trying to get you to do things, when your friends want to talk about one specific thing. Look at how they control the frame, because it'll give you more understanding of how this can be done. Because active frame control can actually become more subtle. Like, I think I now actively control, I now don't think about my active frame control, but I find myself controlling the frame in almost any interaction I'm in, just because I'm used to it. And that's kind of the level you want to get to where your natural interactions are just active frame control, but not like an asshole. Then we have passive frame control. Passive frame control happens when you're passively setting frames that build upon themselves. This is what you do when you're sexual framing. This is what you do when you're cold reading, teasing, when you're shaping a girl, when you're talking about the things you like in relationships. Passive frame control is very powerful because it happens through more subtle means. A lot of passive frame control happens through teasing, or it happens through prepping, where you tell a girl about something in order to get her used to it, or it happens through storytelling. Passive frame control is great. For right now, the most important form of passive frame control for you is teasing, because teasing passively sets the frame that you're a little cooler than the girl. If you can tease a girl and she laughs or giggles and she doesn't get all upset about it, the frame has passively been set that you're a little bit cooler than she is. So if you can set the frame that you're a little bit cooler than she is, then you can now move forward in that frame. Because as long as she doesn't argue, she's subconsciously accepting the frame. And that's what passive frame control is all about. It's all about no muss, no fuss. You just subtly set these things and people agree just by not going against it. Now, in reality, you can't always use passive frame control. A lot of the time, especially early on, you just don't have enough value to use passive frame control. So it's important that you, like I said, you have a mix of passive and active, that you're aware of both of these things going on, that you understand what kind of tactics and techniques go into them, and that you understand when to use them. Passive frame control generally happens later on, with the exception of teasing. Active frame control happens in the beginning. You have to really control the frame early on to have any chance of success. All right, let's recap. In this video, we basically went over the beginning parts of frame control. We learned that frames are the underlying meaning of the interaction, and that they focus our attention and the attention of the people we're talking to onto what we want to be important. We also learned that frames set the situational context or situational relevance in order to decide what's acceptable and weird behavior at the time. Furthermore, we learned that there are two different forms of frame control: active frame control and passive frame control. Active frame control starts early on when you open or start a conversation and involve things like transitioning, being non-reactive, and controlling the conversational subjects. Passive frame control involves things like teasing, shaping, qualifying, stuff like that builds upon itself. So now you have a basic understanding of frame control. It's not 100%, but we're going to revisit this topic in comfort and throughout the entire 12 months to mastery process, because it's really important that you learn as much as you can about frame control. It's one of the 2 or 3 most important things of everything out there. Next week, we're going to have another awesome video for you, so stay tuned for that, and I will talk to you then. Thanks.